When winter falls over a small mountain town, the world grows quiet in a way that feels almost sacred. Snow covers every street, every rooftop, every forgotten story hidden in the cold. But on one stormy night, something happened that no one in Ashvale Crossing would ever forget. A cage fell. A wounded German shepherd broke free, and a weary officer, carrying his own silent grief, stepped into the storm to face a creature everyone else feared. What followed was not just a rescue, it was the beginning of a miracle. Before we begin this journey of hope and healing, tell me where you are watching from. Leave your town in the comments so we can share this moment together. Winter struck Ashvale Crossing with a bitterness that felt almost ancient, as if the mountains themselves were exhaling the cold breath of forgotten storms. The town, tucked between pine-dark slopes and a restless river, glowed faintly beneath strings of shaky lanterns hung across the night market. Snow fell in small, spiraling shards, settling on wooden stalls painted in colors now muted by frost. A wind, sharp enough to feel like a warning, cut straight through scarves and coats, rattling shutters and shaking the last stubborn leaves clinging to rooftops. At the far end of the market, half hidden beneath a trembling lantern, stood a makeshift animal control cage. It wasn't meant for long-term holding, just metal bars bolted to a temporary frame, a patchwork solution until the storm passed. Inside lay the German shepherd they had picked up only hours ago. The dog, around 3 years old, large-bodied with sable-black fur and long scars weaving across his flank, had been rescued from a violent household on the outskirts of town. He had the sturdy build of a working-line shepherd, but with a gauntness that hinted at weeks of neglect. His eyes were the most striking part of him, deep amber, bright yet fractured like glass under pressure. The control officers hadn't even given him a name yet. They called him the Shepherd, spoken in a tone halfway between caution and pity. He growled whenever a stranger came near the bars, but not with the rage of a wild animal, more like the trembling warning of a creature who had learned too many times that hands could hurt. 2 animal control workers stood nearby. The first was Officer Marlene Pike, a middle-aged woman with a strong build, a square jaw, and cheeks reddened by decades of working in harsh weather. Marlene was known for her practical nature, efficient, unsentimental, and outspoken, in a way that made children wary and adults respectful. She had once lost a finger to a feral dog bite in her early years on the job, and since then she carried a stern sort of distance, though deep down she had a soft spot for broken animals. Her partner tonight was Jonah Rivera, 24, lean, freckled, with a nervous energy that made him bounce lightly on his feet when stressed. Jonah had started the job only 6 months earlier. He loved animals, maybe too much, and struggled with the harsher duties of the position. Earlier in the evening, he had watched the shepherd tremble inside the cage, and the sight had made him swallow hard, as if guilt itself had pooled in his throat. "Storm's getting worse," Marlene muttered, tightening the straps of her heavy parka. "Transport van should have been here by now." Jonah exhaled a shuddering cloud of breath. "We shouldn't have left him out here, Marlene. He looks terrified." "Everything is terrifying to an abused dog," she replied, though her voice softened slightly. "He'll be fine. Cage is secure." Fate, however, has never shown much respect for human assurances. A violent gust barreled down the market lane, slamming into the row of wooden stalls. One of the fruit stands, already weakened by the earlier winds, groaned like an old ship hull. Jonah's eyes widened. Mar!" Crash! The stall toppled sideways. Apples and oranges burst across the snow in bright rolling flashes of color. The falling structure struck the cage with the force of a battering ram. The metal lock snapped open. The cage pitched sideways, spinning once before landing hard on the icy ground. The shepherd shot out like a streak of living shadow. People screamed. Children began crying, their high voices scattering through the storm like frightened birds. Vendors stumbled back as tables collapsed and fruit skidded underfoot. A lantern above the chaos flickered, casting long, frantic shadows across the square. And right at the entrance to the market, a patrol car rolled to a stop, lights throwing trembling red-blue halos onto the snow. Officer Daniel Rowan stepped out. Daniel, 42, stood tall with the posture of a man who spent half his life running toward danger instead of away from it. His face was rugged in a worn, dependable way. Thick brows, a strong jaw softened by fatigue, and dark stubble dusting his cheeks. He wore a heavy navy coat, his badge dulled by winter glare. What made people trust Daniel wasn't his build or his uniform, but his eyes, deep-set gray, calm even when the world wasn't. Years ago, Daniel had been one of the most respected canine handlers in the region. His partner, a shepherd named Brutus, had been both his shadow and his shield. But after Brutus died during a rescue operation, saving a trapped child at the cost of his own life, something in Daniel's heart had sealed shut. He never accepted another canine, never trained another dog, never even spoke much about those years. To the townsfolk, Daniel remained steady, kind, polite. But inside, grief had carved a quiet canyon. Tonight, as he stepped into the whipping wind, the echoes of that canyon stirred. He saw the panicked crowd, the fallen stall, the scrap metal cage lying crooked on the snow. And then he saw the shepherd. The dog stood rigid in the middle of the chaos, legs splayed in fear, hackles raised. His breath puffed out in sharp clouds, his ribs rising and falling like they were trying to keep pace with the storm. "Rowan, stay back!" Marlene shouted. "He's unstable," Jonah added, voice cracking as he waved a catch-pole. Daniel didn't answer. Something about the dog's eyes held him rooted to the spot. Something familiar, a kind of broken bravery he'd seen once before in another pair of amber eyes. The shepherd snarled at a nearby vendor who slipped on the ice, but the sound was more desperate than aggressive. He was a cornered animal, not a violent one. Daniel approached slowly, each step measured. Snowflakes clung to his hair and gathered on his shoulders like small white birds. He removed his gloves, letting the icy air sting his skin. It kept his hands steady, his instincts sharp. Behind him, Jonah hissed, "Rowan, what are you doing?" Daniel raised a hand without looking back. "Don't advance on him. Don't chase him. You'll only make him panic." The shepherd whipped his head toward Daniel, lips lifting just enough to reveal the flash of teeth. His stance was defensive, trembling, ready to bolt or fight or collapse if cornered. Daniel had seen this posture before, on battered canines taken from illegal breeders, on dogs who had forgotten what softness felt like. He stopped 3 meters away. No commands, no threats. Just breath, slow, steady, visible in the air like gentle clouds offered to the storm. "Easy," Daniel murmured, his voice the low warmth of a hearth fire. "You're scared. I get it." The shepherd's ears twitched toward the sound. The swirling snow seemed to pause around them, as if the night itself held its breath. Daniel studied him carefully. The way the dog's weight leaned back, the slight tremor in the shoulders, the desperate glances toward escape routes. "Nobody's hurting you tonight," Daniel said softly. "Not while I'm here." It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It wasn't even conscious. It was instinct, an echo of the promise he had once whispered to Brutus every night before deployments. And in a strange, quiet way, the shepherd recognized something in that voice. His growl faded into a confused whine. Jonah blinked. He stopped. Marlene frowned. "What the hell?" Daniel slowly knelt in the snow, lowering himself until he was small, non-threatening, patient. "You're okay," he whispered. "You're all right now." Snow drifted between them, settling lightly on the dog's back. The shepherd's tail remained tucked, but his breathing steadied by a fraction. A small fraction, but enough for Daniel to feel hope stir inside him for the first time in years. The wind moaned across the rooftops, lanterns swayed, and in that fragile pocket of stillness, carved inside the storm, man and dog looked into each other, two wounded creatures recognizing an old sorrow mirrored back at them. The shepherd took one step forward, just one. But it was a beginning. The beginning neither of them had expected, but both of them desperately needed. Snow pressed down on Ashevale Crossing, as if winter were trying to quiet every sound, every heartbeat, every secret trembling beneath the town's wooden beams. The market lights flickered like candles in an old cathedral, their glow shifting through the swirling white, painting the night in glints of gold and shadow. Though chaos had erupted only moments before, an uncanny hush settled as the German shepherd took that single tentative step toward Officer Daniel Rowan. Daniel remained kneeling in the snow, his breath rising gently in the cold. Every instinct in him, every muscle memory from his years as a K9 handler, told him not to rush this fragile moment. It was as delicate as frost feathers forming on a window pane, easily shattered by a sharp movement or a raised voice. Behind him, people whispered with the uncertain awe usually reserved for witnessing something holy or impossible. "That dog. He was ready to rip someone apart," a vendor murmured. "No," Marlene Pike replied, her voice surprisingly soft, for a woman with hands calloused from decades of rough work. "He was ready to save his own life. That's different." Marlene stood with her usual stoic posture, her parka hood dusted in snow. Even though her features seemed carved from granite, something in her eyes had softened as she watched the shepherd approach Daniel. She had seen countless dangerous animals, rescued dozens of scared, mangled souls. But she rarely saw this. Trust, new and trembling, rising in the cold. Next to her was Jonah Rivera, clutching the catch pole like a life raft. His freckled face was pale with tension, though his eyes flickered with something like hope. Jonah was young enough to still believe deeply in happy endings, even if the job had started teaching him otherwise. Tonight, for the first time, he felt that hopeful ache again, the kind that pressed into your ribs and reminded you why you tried. The shepherd's paws pressed lightly into the snow as he leaned forward another inch. The storm churned around him, but the dog stood as if frozen in that small pocket of stillness Daniel had created. Daniel held his ground, profile outlined by the flicker of the market lamps. Snowflakes settled on the dark strands of his hair and on the strong line of his jaw. Though he appeared calm to everyone watching, inside him there was a tremor, a familiar tremor he had spent years burying beneath silence and duty. The memory of Brutus, his fallen K9 partner, hovered at the edge of his mind like a shadow refusing to stay in the past. "Easy? Just breathe," he whispered to the shepherd. The dog's ears twitched to the sound, his amber eyes shifted, tracing the shape of Daniel's voice, searching for danger, betrayal, or something he had not felt in years: safety. The shepherd's stance was trembling. The scars along his flank caught the lantern light like pale strokes of paint on a dark canvas. Every breath he took came from a place born of survival, not peace. Daniel recognized that kind of breathing. He had done it for months after Brutus died. The kind of breath that keeps you alive but never lets you live. A cluster of townsfolk stood several yards behind Jonah and Marlene. Among them was Sarah Whitlock, a shop owner known for her gentle maternal presence. Sarah was in her 50s, short and round-shouldered from years of carrying crates in her spice shop, with a warm face framed by curling gray-brown hair. Her eyes were soft even now, filled not with fear, but with quiet empathy. She had once fostered abused animals for the town shelter in her younger days, before her husband passed away, an event that made her withdraw from the world for a long time. Even now she flinched at loud noises, but when she saw the shepherd trembling, she instinctively pressed a hand over her heart. "He's just scared," she whispered. "The poor thing." The shepherd glanced at the crowd and let out a low, anxious rumble. Daniel shifted slightly, drawing the dog's attention back to him. "It's all right. You're with me now?" he murmured, the softness in his voice carrying that strange blend of sorrow and strength. Behind Daniel, Jonah swallowed hard. Should we back everyone up? Give them space?" Marlene nodded, raising her hand. "Move back, folks. Give Rowan room. Let the officer work." Sarah stepped backward along with the crowd, though she continued watching with a tight expression. The lantern light caught the sheen of tears forming at the corner of her eyes. The shepherd took another step toward Daniel, this time with more weight, more decision. His chest rose and fell in rough, uneven breaths. He wasn't healed, he wasn't calm, but something in him recognized a presence that didn't come with raised fists or angry shouts. Then, a burst of wind swept through the market, slamming into a row of empty stalls. Tarps flapped violently, wooden frames creaked, and a metal sign clattered loudly against a pole. The shepherd flinched. In a heartbeat, he reeled backward, body tight like wound wire, as if expecting a blow. His paws skidded in the snow, fear blazing in his eyes. Daniel didn't move, but he changed something almost imperceptible. He lowered his head a little more, softened his gaze, let his shoulders relax. A posture not of dominance, not of command, but of someone who understood pain without needing to name it. "Hey, hey, it's okay," Daniel breathed. "Just the wind." The shepherd hesitated, panting hard. Every part of him was telling him to run, to defend himself, to disappear. But something even louder lingered now. The voice that hadn't tried to corner him, the eyes that didn't see him as a threat. Slowly, barely, he inched forward again. "Good boy," Daniel whispered. "You're doing great." Jonah exhaled shakily. "Holy, Marlene, he's actually—" "Shh," Marlene warned, though even she looked stunned. The shepherd's nose reached Daniel's extended hand. He sniffed cautiously. The scent of wet wool, faint coffee lingering in the fibers of Daniel's sleeve, the metallic tang of a police radio, and, underneath it all, a human being who carried grief like an old scar, but somehow no cruelty. The shepherd paused, his eyes softened by a fraction, just enough to let one bit of fear melt away. Daniel slowly turned his palm upward. "There you go." The shepherd's breath warmed Daniel's skin. Snow swirled around them in soft, glowing spirals. Then, like a single snowflake tipping the balance of a branch, the dog leaned forward, his forehead touching the back of Daniel's hand. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Marlene exhaled. "Well, I'll be damned." Jonah laughed under his breath, not from humor, but from pure, shaking relief. Even Sarah, standing far behind, smiled through her tears. Daniel didn't rush. He didn't pet the dog fully. He knew better than to assume that, but he let his fingers brush lightly against the shepherd's fur, which was cold, matted, and trembling. The dog didn't pull away. The storm seemed to quiet around them. The lanterns hummed softly. The night, for the first time in hours, felt like it was holding its breath, not from fear, but from reverence. Daniel lifted his eyes to meet the shepherd's. "There you are," he whispered. "I see you." For just 1 second, the dog's tail flickered. Not a wag, but the ghost of one. And in that fragile gesture lay the beginning of trust, the kind that only grows between two beings who have both survived the long winter of the soul. The stillness between them held, despite the storm raging around the market. For the first time, the shepherd wasn't alone. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt the frozen parts of his own heart begin, however slightly, to thaw. Snow swept across Ashvale Crossing like a curtain pulled by invisible hands, thickening until the world seemed made of shifting white and distant lantern glows. The market, moments ago frantic and loud, had quieted to a trembling breath as the German shepherd stood, with his forehead touching Daniel Rowan's outstretched hand. It should have been the turning point, the moment where fear softened and trust took root. But trust born from trauma is fragile, and the past is never so kind as to release its grip easily. A sudden metallic rattle from an overturned produce cart clanged sharply against the cobblestones. The sound sliced through the stillness like a blade. The shepherd jerked backward, eyes widening with the raw panic of a creature dragged unwillingly into memory. A low, trembling growl rumbled from his chest, not a threat, but a warning carved from pain. Daniel remained still. He didn't reach forward. He didn't withdraw. He simply sat in the snow, breathing slow, steady breaths that made small clouds dissolve into the storm. His gray eyes stayed soft, watching the dog not as a threat, but as someone coming apart at the seams. "Easy," he whispered. But the shepherd was no longer seeing Daniel or the snow-covered market. He was seeing shadows. Shadows of a cramped room with peeling wallpaper, where the air smelled of mold and stale alcohol. Shadows of boots that stomped too close. Shadows of fists slamming against steel, shouting voices, and the crack of something hard hitting the side of his ribs. Shadows of a world where every sound meant danger. His heart hammered like a trapped bird. His body shook, muscles locking into the instinct that had kept him alive. Run now or be hurt again. The lantern light flickered across his eyes, and for an instant, Daniel saw something deeper than fear, something like pleading, as though the dog wished he could believe this moment was different, but couldn't yet trust that belief to hold. Behind Daniel, Jonah Rivera took an involuntary step forward. He wasn't reckless. He was just young, nervous, and hopeful, in a way that made him forget how delicate the moment was. "Should I maybe try to help?" he whispered. Marlene Pike placed a heavy gloved hand on his shoulder, stopping him. Her voice cut through the icy air like gravel sliding across stone. "Don't move. Rowan knows what he's doing. You'll spook the dog." Sarah Whitlock, still lingering at the back of the crowd, clasped her hands tightly near her chest, her breath fogged in front of her face. "He's remembering something. You can see it," she murmured, and she was right. The shepherd's paws dug into the snow. The wind carried faint echoes of his own memories. Shouts, boots, cages. The cold brushed against scars that had never fully healed, physical or otherwise. He snarled again, but the sound was fractured, shaking, his tail tucked so tightly beneath his legs it nearly touched his belly. Beezy, eyes darted from shadow to lantern to falling snow, searching desperately for escape. Daniel lowered his gaze, not submissive, but understanding. He had once seen this same expression on Brutus, his old K9 partner, during their first rescue mission together. Brutus had been trained, disciplined, brave, but even trained dogs fear fire. Daniel remembered kneeling in a collapsing house years ago, smoke curling around his hands, Brutus trembling violently at the sound of cracking beams overhead. Animals remember danger in ways humans often forget. "Look at me," Daniel murmured. The shepherd did. His amber eyes locked onto Daniel's, and something flickered between them. An invisible thread stretched taut across the cold, holding two wounded souls in place. Daniel felt it. An echo. Years of silence gave way inside him, not with words, but with memory. Brutus's last breath. The weight of loss that never stopped pressing against his ribs. The quiet nights where Daniel told himself he would never bond with another K9 again, because losing one had nearly broken him. And now, here he was, kneeling in the snow before another shepherd who looked at him with the same mix of fear and courage, the same ember of hope buried beneath hurt. Daniel exhaled slowly, letting his voice carry warmth instead of command. "You're safe now. No one's touching you. Not tonight. Not while I'm here." The shepherd's ears twitched, the smallest sign of comprehension, or maybe a plea for comfort, but his body still vibrated with leftover panic. Snow clung to his fur, melting into tiny droplets that slid along the scars on his side. His breath came in shallow bursts. A strong gust of wind howled through the market, battering the wooden stalls and sending a crate tumbling across the ground. The noise jolted the dog. He lunged, not toward Daniel, but past him, desperate to flee. Jonah gasped. "It's going to bolt." "No," Daniel said quietly, but with such certainty that even Jonah stopped breathing for a moment. Daniel lifted his hand, not high, not threatening, just enough to place it gently in the shepherd's path. The dog skidded to a halt only half a step away, chest heaving, claws digging furrows into the snow. He didn't know why he stopped. Instinct would have carried him into the darkness, hiding until the storm swallowed him whole. But Daniel's presence pulled him back, not like a leash, more like gravity. The shepherd stared at Daniel's hand, as though trying to decipher its meaning. Daniel whispered, "No one's hurting you anymore." The words were simple, but the tone, raw, steady, alive with something both painful and comforting, touched the dog in a place he had buried far beneath fear. His body sagged just slightly, as if exhaustion were finally catching up with him. His growl faded into a whimper, thin and tired. The storm roared, lanterns swayed, but between Daniel and the shepherd, a still pocket formed, again carved out of trembling courage. Daniel slowly lifted his eyes to meet the dog's. "You don't have to run." The shepherd blinked, snow dusting his eyelashes. His breathing slowed, just enough to show the first hint of surrender. Not surrender of spirit, but of fear. A surrender that asked for nothing but the possibility of gentleness. Daniel extended his hand just a little more. The shepherd leaned forward, not fully, not trustingly, but as if pulled by something deep inside him that wanted to believe in the warmth of Daniel's voice. The moment stretched long, suspended in the drifting white. A memory hovered behind the shepherd's eyes. Daniel saw it. Not the specific memory, but the weight of it. The kind that darkens a soul, tightening its edges. And then, As if fate itself had nudged him, Daniel whispered the same words he had once spoken to Brutus before every mission, words he never thought he would say to another dog as long as he lived. "I've got you." The shepherd froze. Something inside him cracked, not violently, but quietly, like thin ice giving way beneath a gentle step. He let out the longest, softest, most heartbreaking sound of the night, a low, trembling whine that carried every moment of suffering he had endured. Daniel's throat tightened. His hand did not shake, though his heart did. The dog didn't collapse into his arms. He didn't sit. He didn't lick Daniel's hand. He simply stopped fighting, stopped struggling, stopped running. For the first time since his old life broke apart, he allowed someone else to stand between him and the storm. It was enough. The storm raged on, but inside that moment, between a grieving officer and a scarred shepherd, something fragile and miraculous began to grow. The beginning of trust, the beginning of healing, the beginning of a bond neither had expected. The winter storm thickened over Ashval Crossing, muffling the world beneath a sweeping hush. Snowflakes, heavy as feathers, drifted in unpredictable spirals as though the sky could not decide whether it wished to fall softly or collapse entirely. The market lanterns flickered in surrender, their glow trembling across the icy cobblestones. And in the middle of that trembling world, Daniel Rowan remained kneeling, his hand extended toward the wounded shepherd. The dog's trembling had slowed, though not ceased. His amber eyes still darted at every shadow, every gust of wind, every sudden shift of sound. But something subtle had shifted. He was no longer trying to flee. His weight, once pitched toward escape, now hovered uncertainly in Daniel's direction. Behind Daniel, voices rose again, fearful, urgent, the kind of voices that did not understand the fragile threads binding this moment together. "Rowan, move aside!" one of the animal control officers barked. Marlene Pike stepped forward, boots crunching with purpose. The seasoned officer's stern face, already weather-beaten and sharp, looked even harsher under the glow of lantern light. "We need to restrain that dog," she called, gripping her catchpole tightly, "before he hurts someone." Daniel didn't turn. His voice, though soft, carried a grounded steadiness that cut through the storm. "He's not trying to attack anyone." Jonah Rivera hovered just behind Marlene, his youthful face flushed with worry. Though he respected her authority, his gaze was fixed on Daniel and the shepherd with anxious conflict. "Marlene, maybe we should let him try," Jonah murmured. "The dog's responding to him." Marlene shot him a glare sharp enough to slice through the wind. "Responding? He's seconds away from panicking again. And a panicked shepherd is dangerous." Sarah Whitlock, still lingering near the market entrance, cupped her hands around her mouth. "Rowan's got him. Let him work." Her voice, warm and maternal even when strained, carried through the air like a plea for mercy. Not just for the dog, but for the moment itself. Daniel finally rose from his kneeling posture, though slowly, with deliberate calm. Snow clung to the dark fabric of his coat. His gloveless hands reddened in the cold, fingers stiff but steady. He positioned himself directly between the shepherd and the approaching officers. "Marlene," he said quietly, "if you put that pole near him right now, you'll undo everything." Marlene's jaw tightened. "That's not your call, Rowan. That animal is legally under our jurisdiction." Daniel met her stare with quiet resilience. "It's about his safety, and the safety of all of you. You scare him now, he'll snap, not out of aggression, out of terror." Before Marlene could reply, a sharp gust of wind tore through the market, sending a stack of crates tumbling. The shepherd jolted, letting out a panicked bark that cracked through the air. He scrambled backward, but this time, instead of bolting away, he stumbled toward Daniel, pressing against the side of his leg in desperate confusion. The contact startled the crowd. Jonah blinked. "Did he just—" Sarah gasped. "He's seeking him." Daniel did not look away from Marlene, but he angled his leg protectively, allowing the dog to press against him, letting the creature feel the anchored weight of a human who would not turn away. The shepherd trembled violently, his cold nose brushing against Daniel's boot, his flank twitching with the remnants of panic. But he stayed there, and that gesture, the leaning, the seeking, held more meaning than 100 obedient sights or trained responses. Marlene stared, stunned. The stern lines of her face softened for the first time that night. "He trusts you," she murmured, almost ashamed to say it aloud. Daniel nodded once. "He's not attacking. He's asking for help." Jonah swallowed hard, lowering his catch pole. "So what do we do?" Marlene hesitated, torn between protocol and the unmistakable sight before her. A dog clinging to an officer as though he were the last safe place in the world. She had seen desperate animals before, but rarely one that chose its only sanctuary so willingly. "We're supposed to secure him," she muttered, voice tightening under the weight of regulation. Daniel softened his tone, but kept his ground. "Protocol allows exceptions when the animal's mental state is compromised. If we force him, it'll break him." The shepherd whimpered softly, a haunting, pleading sound. His body bowed inward, shrinking as though bracing for a blow that never came. Snow collected along his back, melting into the fur near his scarred flank. Daniel finally crouched beside him. His hand hovered an inch above the dog's neck, not touching yet, waiting for permission. He whispered, "It's okay now. You did good." The shepherd inhaled sharply, a trembling, visible exhale leaving his lungs. Then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned into the space of Daniel's waiting hand. Not fully, not boldly, but enough. Enough for Daniel to let his fingers press gently into the thick, trembling fur. A hush rippled through the market. Sarah covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Jonah let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Even Marlene dropped her gaze briefly, unable to deny the truth unfolding in front of her. Daniel stroked the shepherd's head with slow, careful movements, as though touching something fragile carved out of glass. "You're safe," he murmured. "No one's putting you back in a cage tonight." At the word cage, the dog flinched, but Daniel steadied him with a quiet, grounding presence. Snowflakes drifted onto the shepherd's eyelashes. His tail didn't wag, not yet, but his body relaxed by a fraction, the first sign of surrender not born of fear, but of trust. A surrender saying, "I don't want to fight anymore. I want to be saved." Marlene exhaled. "All right," she said reluctantly. "We'll stand down, but he's your responsibility until the van arrives." Daniel rose, keeping one hand on the shepherd's neck so the dog wouldn't lose contact. "Then I'll take full responsibility." The shepherd looked up at him, eyes weary, wounded, and searching. And for the first time that night, those amber eyes held something new. Not rage, not panic, not survival. Hope. Daniel whispered, "Good boy." His voice cracked just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to hear, but enough for the winter wind to carry it away. The shepherd closed his eyes. And there, in the heart of Ashvale Crossing, beneath the swirling storm and trembling lanterns, a battle-scarred creature laid down the weight of his terror at the feet of a man who had sworn, long before this night, to protect the ones who could not protect themselves. Winter did not soften easily in Ashvale Crossing. Snow piled along rooftops and buried the edges of fences. Ice glazed the pavement each morning. The whole town seemed locked inside a breath that refused to thaw. Yet inside Daniel Rowan's home, a small timber house at the foot of Pinecrest Road, something warmer had begun to take root. The shepherd slept curled in the corner of Daniel's living room on the first night, trembling through dreams that held more fear than rest. Daniel didn't sleep much either. He sat at the small kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea, watching the rise and fall of the dog's fragile breaths. The lamplight cast soft gold over both of them, the man burdened by grief and the creature shaped by trauma, sharing the same silent space. Daniel had given him a name earlier that evening. "Kodiak," he murmured after hours of quiet thought. "You're strong, survived more than most. Kodiak fits." The shepherd, Kodiak, didn't react then. But later, as Daniel whispered the name again, while gently refreshing the water bowl, the dog raised his head just slightly, ears twitching. It wasn't recognition yet, not connection, but it was something. A beginning. Weeks passed, winter deepened, and the slow work of healing began, not in leaps, but in painstaking inches. Kodiak did not transform in a day. He did not suddenly brighten or wag his tail freely. His fear clung to him like a second coat, worn thin but stubborn. Yet every night, something new shifted. The first night, Kodiak slept in a tight ball, so tense his muscles barely rested. The third night, he lifted his head when Daniel walked in after a late shift, his amber eyes tracking him, not with fear, but with wary interest. By the end of the first week, he would eat while Daniel stood nearby. Jonah, who visited once to drop off behavioral assessment forms, remarked with awe, "He wouldn't even look at us before. This is amazing." Daniel simply shrugged, though a quiet pride flickered under his reserved demeanor. "It's not me. He's choosing to recover." But it was Daniel, more than he knew. Character played a role too. Daniel was a man shaped by steady patience. After losing Brutus years ago, he learned that grief does not leave when demanded. It must be carried, tended, spoken to gently in the quiet moments. He extended that same gentle strength to Kodiak, not smothering him with affection, not forcing progress, only offering consistency. Daniel's appearance, tall, solid, and rugged, might have intimidated some, but Kodiak responded not to his height or broad shoulders, but to his stillness. Daniel moved with measured calm, a kind of grounded presence rare in a world bustling with hurried footsteps. He rarely spoke loudly. When he addressed Kodiak, his tone was warm iron, soft yet firm. "You're all right," he would say each morning. "Let's just take today as it comes." Kodiak learned to trust that voice, not instantly, slowly, like ice melting one cautious drop at a time. The second week brought new milestones. Kodiak began following Daniel from room to room, not close, always at a distance of a few steps, but with a decided intention. When Daniel cooked dinner, Kodiak lingered by the doorway. When Daniel washed dishes, Kodiak lay near the kitchen archway, eyes half-lidded but alert. He still flinched at sudden noises, still jolted when the radio in Daniel's patrol car crackled, still froze when Daniel moved too quickly toward him. But he no longer growled at shadows. The nightmares lessened too, though on nights when he whimpered in his sleep, Daniel would sit on the floor a few feet away, offering presence without intrusion. "You're safe," Daniel would whisper into the dim light. "I promise." Sometimes Kodiak's breathing slowed, sometimes it didn't, but Daniel stayed anyway. By the third week, the first true sign of joy emerged. It was subtle, barely more than a flicker of the tail. Daniel had just returned from a long shift, patrolling the snow-covered outskirts of town. His boots were heavy with slush, and the cold clung to his jacket like unwelcome static. When he stepped inside, Kodiak, who had been resting near the fireplace, lifted his head. His ears perked, his eyes brightened just slightly, his tail moved, just once. A small, hesitant wag, as if he were testing the motion after years of forgetting how. Daniel froze. Then he laughed softly, a sound he hadn't made in years. "Hey there," he whispered, kneeling. "Good to see you too." Kodiak blinked slowly, the closest thing he could offer to a greeting, and for Daniel, it was enough to thaw something frozen in his chest. The fourth week changed more than Kodiak. Kids in Ashevale Crossing began to notice the large dog walking calmly beside the quiet officer in the mornings. They would wave timidly from the sidewalks. Daniel kept Kodiak close and never forced interactions. But one morning, a little girl named Molly, a bundled-up 6-year-old with a missing front tooth, stood still and waited as Daniel passed. "Hi, doggy," she said, voice soft. Kodiak froze. Daniel crouched beside him. "It's okay. Just watching. No one's going to touch you." The girl didn't move, sensing the delicacy of the moment the way children often do better than adults. "It's all right," Daniel murmured again. Kodiak exhaled sharply, tension rippling along his shoulders. Snowflakes drifted onto his fur. He inched forward, one step, then another. Molly smiled. "He's beautiful," she whispered. Kodiak lowered his head, allowing her to come within arm's reach. She didn't touch him, Daniel didn't allow it yet, but she stood close, sharing the cold morning with him. On the way home, Daniel brushed a hand gently over Kodiak's back. "Proud of you." Kodiak leaned into the touch. Through the month, Daniel changed too in ways he hadn't expected. He began speaking more, not to people. He remained the quiet, steady officer the town relied on, but to Kodiak. He told the dog about his day, about the stress at the station, about the new recruits, even about the weather. He found that speaking aloud helped lighten the invisible weight he'd carried since Brutus died. Kodiak listened. That was enough. In return, the dog offered Daniel something he hadn't felt in years: purpose that didn't ache, loyalty without expectation, companionship without the shadow of loss hanging directly overhead. They healed each other in small, ordinary ways. Kodiak would rest near Daniel's feet when he read the newspaper. Daniel would wake early on his days off to take Kodiak walking along the quiet river path. Kodiak began sleeping more peacefully. Daniel began sleeping deeper. The house felt less empty. Winter did not leave Oshvale Crossing. But inside that small timber home, something warmer bloomed. Two souls, battered by different storms, rediscovered the steadiness of quiet company, the simple power of being seen without being judged, the fierce tenderness of trust growing root by careful root. Daniel touched the scar along Kodiak's flank one evening, not pressing, just brushing his fingers lightly across it. "You've survived too much," he whispered. Kodiak pressed his entire weight gently against Daniel's leg in response. Daniel closed his eyes and exhaled. A long, soft release he didn't realize he'd been holding for years. They were healing each other, not fast, not perfectly, but truly. And sometimes that is enough to turn a long winter into the first warmth of spring. Morning arrived gently over Ashvale Crossing, as though the winter itself had grown tired of its own harshness and wanted, for one quiet day, to soften. Snow drifted from the sky in slow, deliberate flakes, no longer the fierce, wind-whipped shards of storms past, but peaceful white feathers settling across rooftops, pine branches, and the narrow forest road leading out of town. Daniel Rowan walked this road with steady, unhurried steps, his breath curling into the chilly air. His boots left precise prints in the fresh powder, each one softened almost immediately by the falling snow. Beside him, moving with a calm he had not possessed weeks ago, walked Kodiak. The shepherd looked different now, not in body, though the healthy weight he'd gained made him seem sturdier, nor in the scars that still marked his flank, but in the quiet glow behind his amber eyes. Those eyes no longer darted at every shadow or flinched at distant noises. His ears perked softly at birdsong, his tail hung in a relaxed curve behind him, and his gait, once tense and coiled like a spring, now moved with measured confidence. Kodiak's transformation wasn't magic. It was the slow miracle of patience. And yet, standing here in the filtered morning light, he looked like a creature reborn. Daniel glanced down at him. "You ready for a walk, partner?" Kodiak lifted his head, ears twitching at the familiar voice. His pace quickened for a moment, leaving a small trail of disturbed snow before he matched Daniel's rhythm again. He didn't need to look up to show his answer. The way he walked, close but not clinging, calm but alert, said everything. The forest road wound along the edge of a frozen creek, its waters trapped beneath a sheet of ice that shimmered like glass. The pines lining the path wore coats of fresh snow, their needles whispering under the soft weight. A faint glow from the sun, pale, cautious, as though waking slowly, filtered through the branches. It was the kind of morning Daniel used to love, but had avoided for years. After Brutus died, he had stopped taking sunrise walks, stopped visiting the forest paths, stopped allowing quiet moments to linger long enough to hurt. Silence had become a place he didn't dare enter. But now, walking with Kodiak at his side, silence felt different. Not empty, not sharp, just still, peaceful, like a hand gently placed over an old wound. They paused at a bend in the road. Daniel inhaled deeply, letting the cold air fill his chest. Kodiak stepped forward onto a small rise overlooking the snowy clearing ahead. The wind ruffled his fur. Daniel crouched beside him. Snowflakes dusted his hair and the shoulders of his dark coat. "You've come a long way," he murmured. Kodiak turned his head toward Daniel, amber eyes warm, steady, and deeply present. There was no fear in them now, no tremor, just trust, quiet, complete trust. Daniel set a hand gently on the dog's head. "You did good, Kodiak." The shepherd closed his eyes briefly, leaning into the touch. For a heartbeat, Daniel felt something inside him shift, a soft ache that wasn't pain, but release. He realized then that he hadn't spoken Brutus's name aloud in weeks, and it wasn't because he had forgotten. It was because the grief had finally found a place to rest. He swallowed, his breath catching with a strange mix of sorrow and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to Kodiak, to the winter morning, or to something far larger than either. The wind carried his words across the clearing. A moment later, faint voices reached them through the pines. "Is that Kodiak? Kodiak, over here!" Daniel lifted his head, surprised. From the snowy path leading back toward town, a small group of children emerged, bundled in the thick scarves and bright winter hats. Molly, the gap-toothed 6-year-old from the week before, ran at the front. Her boots kicked up puffs of snow as she waved excitedly. "Kodiak!" she called again, laughing. Kodiak's ears perked. He turned toward the sound, tail sweeping the air once, twice. It was not a fearful motion, not hesitant. It was an honest greeting, offered freely. The children slowed as they approached, still remembering Daniel's earlier caution. Molly stopped a few steps away. "Hi, Officer Rowan. Hi, Kodiak." Daniel smiled softly, a small smile, but the first true one he had worn this early in the morning in a very long time. "Morning, kids." Molly rocked on her heels, mittens clutched together in excitement. "Can we say hi to him today?" Daniel looked at Kodiak. Kodiak looked back, his posture relaxed, his gaze soft. Daniel nodded. "Okay." Slowly, one at a time. Molly approached first, holding her mittened hand out gently. Kodiak sniffed it, then nudged her palm with his nose. Molly giggled, a bright bell-like sound that cut through the quiet forest air. "He likes me," Daniel chuckled. "Looks like it." The other kids moved closer, careful and patient. Kodiak handled it beautifully. He didn't flinch or pull back. He simply stood there, accepting the soft greetings as if he had been doing this his whole life. Snow crunched behind Daniel. He turned to see Sarah Whitlock approaching with a thermos tucked under her arm. She wore a brown coat, fur-lined boots, and her usual kind smile, though today it seemed brighter. "Thought you two would be out here," she said, handing Daniel a cup of warm cider. "Saw the kids running and figured I'd follow." Daniel accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thanks, Sarah." She sipped her own cup, watching Kodiak interacting with the children. "You've worked wonders with him," she said softly. "Truly." Daniel shook his head. "He did the hard part. I just stayed." Sarah smiled knowingly, the kind of smile people carry after surviving their own storms. "Sometimes staying is the miracle." Daniel glanced at Kodiak, the once terrified dog now surrounded by laughing children, snowflakes clinging to his fur, amber eyes bright with life. Yeah, Daniel thought, miracle felt like the right word. The children eventually continued down the path, waving goodbye. Kodiak watched them go, tail swaying gently. When they were out of sight, he turned back to Daniel and pressed his head lightly against the officer's thigh. Daniel froze for a breath. Then he placed his hand on Kodiak's neck, warm, solid, present. "You're home," Daniel whispered. "We both are." The wind shifted, the pines rustled softly, and somewhere deep inside Ashvale Crossing, as word spread through the market stalls and along the snow-covered streets, townsfolk began retelling the story they had witnessed weeks earlier, the story of the dangerous shepherd who became the gentle heart of winter, and the officer who found light again in the eyes of a broken soul. In time, they called it a miracle, a winter miracle, and for the first time in many years, Daniel didn't correct them. Some miracles, after all, are small and quiet. They arrive not with thunder, but with a single step forward on a snowy night, and a hand reaching back with hope. Sometimes the miracles God sends do not arrive with bright lights or thunder. Sometimes they come quietly through a loyal dog who learns to trust again, or through an officer who chooses compassion instead of fear. This story reminds us that even in the coldest winters of our lives, God walks beside us. He guides our steps, protects our families, and brings hope in moments that seem small but carry His gentle power. In our everyday struggles, when we feel tired, worried, or alone, God still works in ways we often notice only after the storm has passed. A kind word, a helping hand, a second chance. These are miracles too. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, and remember to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your family with peace and protection wherever you are. And if you believe in the quiet miracles He sends, type Amen in the comments.